Ladies and gentlemen, the national anthem of the newly formed Ududuwa Nation.
To have an educational system that works and is good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof, for that overview and for what came out of this, that the future is knowledge-based, about talent, innovation, entrepreneurship, and place assets. And despite all the problems that Nigeria has had, if we're to move forward, then we must embrace knowledge and quality rather than quantity, and look out for the best practice models in other low and medium income countries, especially those that have transited to higher income. And that will be a great thing, because the Awolowo Foundation has the ability to partner with private sector and work with public sector to get things done. So on that note, I'd like to invite Professor Segun Gbadegesin, a retired professor of philosophy from the Howard University. Prof, you have 10 minutes. At about 8 minutes, I'll give you, I'll make a little sound so that you will know that you have 2 more minutes. Professor Gbadegesin.
Okay. Yeah. Can I share screen too, please?
You can. Yes, you can.
Okay, good.
You all have sharing rights. Thank you.
Good. Well, good evening over there in Nigeria. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can.
We can. Very good. Yeah. Thank you very much for the invitation to be on the program. It's a good day. It's a blessed day. Today is the 66th anniversary of the first day of class for the first set of students of the Universal Free Primary Education Program in 1955. So we thank God for the vision that led to that. We thank God for the pioneers. And my assignment here is to look back with a view to looking forward. And I think what I want to start with first is that when we think about the inauguration of the free education system, free primary education system, we should not just focus on that aspect. We should focus on what was the mindset of Chief Obafemi Awolowo and his team going into public service. And we have to do that because what is lacking now is what they had. They had a deep sense, a deep understanding of humanity and society. And they wanted their intervention to do something about the condition of humanity. I'm not too sure that we can say that of many of the folks who are in public service now. But I leave that aside for now. Chief Obafemi Awolowo was, of course, the visionary. And in that vision of his, the emphasis is on human being as the sole dynamic in nature, a member of a family and of the state, having rights and obligations, and a consumer as well as an agent of production. Now, the question that occurred to them to ask was, what does this human being need to succeed as the sole dynamic in nature? And secondly, what do the family and society need to do to help him or her? And the answer simply is education, education, education. Because the success of a human being, according to Chief Obafemi Awolowo and the People's Republic, depends wholly on the degree of his health, his intellectual comprehension and spiritual depth. This is because the coefficient of his efficiency in all undertakings generally, and of his productivity in any economic venture in particular, is education in every sense of the word. And by education, they mean the process of physical and mental culture, whereby a man's and a woman's personality is developed to the fullest. And that is the emphasis, full development. And education is that means to full development, as well as a means to national freedom. That was in a 1947 lecture by Chief Obafemi Awolowo. So why educate? Why do we educate? The answer, of course, is that human personality is fully developed through education, and a man or woman whose personality is so fully developed never fears anything, never cringes, never feels inferior, will resist any form of enslavement, is confident and courageous, and exercises freedom without endangering the freedom of others. Now, over the years, if we look back and if we follow this prescription, what we are experiencing now, ranging from all kinds of abnormalities in our system, we would not have experienced them. But we veered off from that mindset. We veered off completely from that trajectory. And what we are experiencing now is the result. Now, Chief Obafemi Awolowo also combined education and national freedom. In other words, education has something to do with national freedom. It's a means, number one, of attaining national freedom from the British government, and secondly, a means of benefiting from that freedom when it is finally obtained. So there's two visions in one. One, the moral vision that emphasizes man as the sole dynamic in nature. And second, the political vision to achieve the goal of national freedom from colonial masters. Education of citizens is key. And to maintain that freedom once obtained, education is also key. So the moral vision was the foundation of the political vision. Now, we may ask the question, why is the transition from education is important to education must be free? There are three arguments for that. One, the moral argument. If education is a good for everyone, then it's equally good for other individuals. If one individual deserves education, other individuals also deserve education. And where individuals cannot afford that good, then society is obligated to provide the means to achieve that good for everyone. There's a complete set of arguments for that in many of Chief Awolowo's writings. There is a pragmatic argument. If everybody must be educated, when the majority are uneducated, the few educated cannot live a normal life as educated people elsewhere do. We are experiencing that foresight. We are experiencing it now because we refuse to educate everyone. We know what we have been experiencing over the last couple of years, especially this past year. Development argument. The state stands to lose the potential contributions of the poorly uneducated to its development. Therefore, all hands must be on deck. And then the planning. What went into the planning? It was detailed, it was delicate. Positive contributions include a conducive political structure, strong and dedicated political leadership, and skilled and administrative leadership. The political structure, there was true federal structure, which allowed each region freedom in the matter of education. Then there was revenue allocation system that favored derivation. And we know how well managed the internal revenue generation effort was in the old Western region. Now, on political leadership, Chief Awolowo and his team were, of course, very well prepared. Each team member was well educated, a confirmation of the political argument of the vision. A survey of the needs of the program was done adequately. Teachers, number of teachers needed, classrooms needed, projected number of new students and their graduation rates, feeder institutions, secondary modern schools, additional secondary schools, trade schools, additional teacher training colleges. And of course, the action group was a mass party which mobilized the people for policy ownership. The administrative leadership was excellent. The cadre was apolitical, was well educated, highly dedicated, with skills in analysis of needs and implementation of policies. So all these were indeed positive contributions that led to the success of the launching of the program and its sustenance over the years.
2 minutes.
Of course, there was opposition, as we know. Partisan politics, which was the worst of its kind, but of course, action groups stuck to its program and the timeline. Now, in terms of sustenance, impact of political development post-1966 affected it, unitarization and centralization, military revenue system, which dumped derivation in favor of all kinds of things, post-military civilian culpability in education decline, and of course, misplaced priorities. How do we reclaim the vision of 1955? Do that by striving for and achieving a true federal structure, directing resources to the benefit of education sector, inspiring the private sector to contribute to public education, and encouraging shared responsibility between families and communities on the one hand and the state on the other. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. I will, for that very interesting lecture, talking about the vision of Chief Awolowo. And he said the education were two things. He had both a moral and a political vision. One building the person, and the other one seeing that education was a means of attaining national freedom, was a key for development as well. And that education should be free was also moral, pragmatic, and developmental. If it's good for one, it's good for all. And pragmatic, you cannot enjoy life when most of the people around you are disenfranchised, have not been educated. And a country with undeveloped people will not develop. So I want to thank you very much, sir, for this, and I will at this time invite Professor Banji Oyeyinka, who is a professor of African American and African Studies at the University of California, Davis, USA. Prof, you have 10 minutes. I will remind you 2 minutes to the time.
Thank you very much, moderator. Thank you, colleagues on this panel. Thank you, Dr. Tokumbo Aola for inviting me. I hope you can all hear me.
Very well, very well.
Yes, very well.
Yeah, just to say that I live in Abidjan. I'm with the Africa Development Bank as Senior Special Advisor to the President of the Africa Development Bank. I'm very far away from California. I like to focus. Hello, can you hear?
We can hear you. We can hear you.
We can hear you,
good.
yes.
All right. So I like to focus on I want to thank the last two speakers. I think they've laid a very good ground for what we are going to discuss. My emphasis is going to be on the developmental part of Chief Awolowo's vision. As Eddie Fletcher said, education is our greatest opportunity to give an irrevocable gift to the next generation. Therefore, education exerts very powerful and long-lasting generational impact on society. The predetermined conditions of an individual very early in their lives, especially those determined by the material conditions of their parents, especially poverty, constitute a drag on their progress and tend to reduce their chances of opportunities of success in life, including the impairment of basic rights and freedom. And I'd like to say that when you look at the vision of Chief Awolowo, I mean, he actually foresaw what most of the international organizations came up with years after, that education is a right. Now, what I want to do is to just summarize basically my outline what I have here because of time. The first thing is to look at the impact of COVID. COVID has exacerbated the widening opportunity divide between the wealthiest and the poorest together, with the increasing difficulty in attaining the income convergence that we also foresaw in the early 60s when we got independence. Many countries in Africa had hoped that over time, over the next 50 years, we should achieve some level of income convergence with those who have gone ahead of us. Of course, it hasn't happened, and we've seemed to have fallen further behind. And symptomatic of this, actually, is the state of education, which has been really vividly painted by the last two speakers. According to UNESCO, the COVID-19 pandemic has created the largest disruption of the educational system in history, affecting nearly 1.6 billion learners in more than 190 countries along continent. The closure of schools, all learning spaces, 94% actually of world student population, up to 99% in low and lower middle income countries have been affected. So the crisis, as we've seen, is actually making worse pre-existing educational disparities. And that's the first point we need to know. Whenever you have income disparities, you begin to have widening, other existing conditions widening, by reducing opportunities for many of the vulnerable children, youth, adults, particularly those living in poor and rural areas, girls, refugees, persons, and of course, it also has a lot of impact on ethnicity and so forth. So the learning losses, as the former speakers have said, is going to extend beyond this generation and erase decades of progress, not least in support of girls and young women's education and retention in school. The estimate we have here is that close to 24 million additional children and youth from pre-primary to tertiary may drop out again in 2021 due to this pandemic. Now, what Chief Awolowo focused upon early in the vision was to ensure that everyone has a foundation. Because among the most lasting impact is that education system perpetuates and reproduces social inequalities. And I like to make a distinction between equity and equality. Equity is that the characteristics of being fair and impartial, and to sum it, to have a level playing field for everyone, irrespective of your background. That seems to have totally disappeared from our society. And when there is the law or the moral imperative that assures equity, you can achieve some level of equality in society. The widening inequities that we see here has led to huge inequalities in our society. The very foundation of this process is primary education. A primary school education is the foundation upon which other levels of education can be built. If a primary school education is lacking, that individual is starting life on a very, very rocky foundation. This is, I believe, the basis upon which Chief Awolowo went ahead to enact the free education in 1955. Now, there are several dimensions of disparities, particularly what I call social equity and social inequalities. Education is one of the most key. It has a tendency to perpetuate and reproduce social inequalities because of its influence on income, as well as health, longevity of individuals. And therefore, the way and the level of education that someone has tend to determine how an individual spends their adult life. To that extent, ensuring a fair, in other words, equity, inclusive system which affords all the benefits of education is vital for an equitable society. Therefore, without quality basic education, the very foundation of educational process, an individual's life journey will be very rough. If you look at northern Nigeria today, and not surprising, the poorest area of our nation, over 11 million, some say 15 million children are out of school. And the same, you find a very strong correlation between illiteracy, poverty, disease, with a lack of education. Now, let me just end up with 4 basic channels by which this pandemic is transmitting inequalities. Number 1 is the digital divide, limited access to technologies, lack of access to radio, television, computers, internet, data left many students unable to engage in remote learning. Many don't even have electricity, not even lamps in some homes. They lack access to the internet, and which is becoming increasingly indispensable for education. Most students have no access to internet-enabled smartphones. Only a handful have access to mobile phones that can support basic texting functionalities. In some homes, you find surveys that have been carried out. Parents don't even have a computer. Lessons may be on video. The kids are not able to listen except on audio.
2 minutes.
2 minutes? Okay. The second channel is intergenerational educational inequality. When the parents, especially the mother is not educated, it's very likely that these students will also suffer the same fate, and poverty will be transmitted intergenerationally. Number 3 is people living in rural areas. That is a problem. They are less likely to have resources to adapt to all of the issues that we listed earlier. Number 4, children, of course, living in extreme poverty. For many of you here, you may actually know some of the data we generated here at the bank. 50% of the poorest of the poor are projected to live in just 3 countries in 2030. Nigeria, DRC, Congo, that's DR Congo, and Ethiopia. 50% if current growth continues. In other words, if we don't change course, and this includes rapidly educating our people, 50% of all the world's poorest people are going to be living in only 3 countries in Africa. In conclusion, fiscal pressures have increased. Financing of education will face major challenge because most of our leaders don't even appreciate it. Exacerbating massive pre-COVID education funding gaps. On the other hand, the crisis has stimulated wide-ranging innovation within the educational sector. We have seen innovative approaches in support of education and training continuity, from radio to television to take-home packages. But we need to invest to ensure that our children have access to it. I close with Chief Awolowo's quote. He said, in order to attain to the goals of economic freedom and prosperity, Nigeria must do certain things as a matter of urgency and priority. It must provide free education at all levels and free health facilities for the masses of its citizens. What he said 66 years ago might as well been said yesterday. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Just as a recap, Prof has told us that COVID has widened the education divide, and that the primaries, and he also mentioned that primary school is the most important and it's foundational, and that education tends to perpetuate, or lack of education tends to perpetuate, social inequalities. And one of the ways that COVID has worsened this divide are four things: the digital divide, the lack of access to technology, the intergenerational inequality. So if you have mothers who are illiterate, it's likely that their children will be. The rural-urban divide, because they have no resources. And children in poverty in places with burgeoning populations in such a way that Nigeria will be one of the last 3 countries to have children out of poverty. 50% will have 50% of the children still in poverty. That's Nigeria, DRC, and Ethiopia. And which means if we do not change the way we approach education, we're going to be in dire straits. So I want to thank you, Prof, and I will now be moving to the people who are in charge of education in Nigeria. And I will, at this time, want to invite the Commissioner for Education in Lagos State, Mrs. Shade Adefisayo. 10 minutes I'll give, and I'll remind you 2 minutes to the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, Dr. Aolo Dosunmu. I am honored that you have asked me to speak at this event, for I'm a great follower of your late father, and I consider that anything I do today, even as a Commissioner for Education, I would always think about what would Baba Awolowo do. Of course, I dare not say I'm near him in any way, but I do know that I put him before me always. And so I'm supposed to talk about policy thrusts and practical experience. I'm not going to use a paper because I want to make this absolutely conversational, because it's really a conversation. I will start with the practical and move to the policy thrusts. I've heard what all the professors before me said. I thank you very much. It's really an honor to sit in the same panel with such brain power, and I have certainly taken a lot from what you have said. Before the pandemic, we must acknowledge, unless we want to deceive ourselves, the poor state of public schools, the poor state of education, let me put it, for vulnerable and poor children in the state. And before then, when we came in 2019, September, we're very excited at the possibility that, look, here it is, it's in our hands. So we developed plans focusing on 15 key drivers of transformation that we would key into. The budget came out for education. Education was given a significant boost in its budget, and then the epidemic struck. Now, Lagos is an interesting place. Unlike the rest of the country, there are actually more private schools and there are more children in private schools. It's reckoned, there are many studies, but I think the statistics range from 65 to 72% of children being in private schools. But what kind of private schools? And so while we have 1,700 roughly public primary, junior, and SS schools, we have 18,000 private schools. And of these, it is reckoned that at least 80 to 85% of the children are actually in low-cost schools with similar demographics to the public schools. The reasons for this are not far-fetched. There's been loss of confidence in public education, and we just don't have enough public schools in Lagos. With 1,016 primary schools, for example, you can tell with the population of about 20 million that this is wholly inadequate. So we had a lot of plans for all these. What I'm going to talk about now, whatever I say now, will concern the children, the 80% of the children in low-cost schools and children in public schools. Like I said, there's similar demographics, they face a similar situation. Because before the pandemic and when it was about to strike, the 20% or 15% were saying things like, oh, we have online, our children would just move school online, everything will be fine. But we knew that we had not invested sufficiently in online solutions and that the children would therefore suffer increasingly during a lockdown. Some people felt the lockdown would be for a short period, so just treat it like a holiday, and when they come back, they'll go back to learning. Luckily, in the Ministry of Education, we did not share that opinion at all. But we started to think, how will we ensure that majority of the children keep learning? And that was where we went to the lowest form of technology, the radio, because this showed, many studies too had shown that this was the most accessible to poorer children. But again, we found out that many poor children do not have radios. So we actually had to have a drive, a serious drive for people to donate radios. And we delivered these to most vulnerable children in hard to reach places. In Lagos, we do have a lot of inaccessible terrain. So we deliver these radios there. And we worked with partners as well. We worked with a lot of partners to deliver classes on radio and television. I'm glad to say a lot of them donated their airtime free, and we held classes till December. In fact, we are still meeting now to resuscitate the classes again. But all the same, despite all this, there were still many children who were not accessing learning. And we knew, of course, that radio and TV, by their very nature, are not intuitive. They are not, you can't access that learning is taking place. They are not online. They are not real-time. And so we tried to go into real-time solutions. We partnered with a group again, and we had online solutions. Again, no data, no devices. Many of our students, most of these students had no access whatsoever to any device to be able to get to the internet. They had no data. They would use their father. Even their fathers did not use featured phones. So they had no access. So again, we went on a serious drive, and we were able to get many organizations to help us, sponsor us, and we're able to give the terminal, most of the students in terminal classes, computers. We gave them website, loaded our curriculum, and we're able to do a bit of teaching and learning. But the reality was actually that most of these children were not learning. The reality was that they were not staying indoors. The children in this vulnerable group are sometimes working children, house helps, vulcanizers, and so on. So they were on the streets. In fact, there was a trip I took to Ikorodu to look at schools, and I found somebody who put loudspeakers on the street, and they were dancing. There were hundreds of children there just dancing because I guess boredom and so on had set in. So the reality was that they were not staying indoors, they were not learning indoors, they were working. Their family needed them to make an income. So by the time students resumed in September, frankly speaking, I know we did radio, I know we did all this, but frankly speaking, there was a severe learning slide. A lot of children didn't come back. A large cohort, and this will have immense consequences, as we've learned, because when we start building up a large cohort of out-of-school children, you can imagine what that will do for social cohesion. There was widening inequity, as the professor before me said, sheer unfairness. So many children learned nothing, and so many didn't come back. And then there was a very serious factor that we hadn't thought of during when children were at home, when parents said, well, he hasn't been to school for 6 months, so that means school is not that important. And so the children had started learning trades, which is fine, but it's best, like we all know, to learn these trades in a more formal environment. We should still go to school and learn trades, and therefore we've got to make school consequential, important, and a place where children can learn at their own pace and not treat the learning of trades as that for children who are not clever. There are children who are very clever in using their hands, and children who are very clever in using other parts of their anatomy. And so we've got to understand this. But you see, what happened was these children just didn't come back. And they, of course, suffered from increasing poverty, mental problems, sexual harassment, and so on. The teachers too lapsed. We did a lot of online training during this period for our teachers. We had them we taught them how to use the computer, how to present online, how to teach online. And so we kept on training them, but we knew that there was a slide with them as well. And then, of course, at the end, you can imagine the impact on the students. So by the time they came back, teachers were counselors, teachers were giving them food. Some couldn't even come because they hadn't eaten in days. They had no uniforms, and we had to have another drive again to bring children back in September.
2 minutes.
I'm almost done. So what are the lessons that we've learned? Number one is, for vulnerable children, school is actually a safer environment than home. At least in school, they keep social distance, they learn the protocols, and they are learning as well. Second, technology is a major driver of how we are going to solve this problem. I am not sure this pandemic is going anytime soon. I am not very positive about our ability to get enough vaccinations. And so I'm very worried and feel that it's still possible that we will still have to go online at a point, in which case we must invest in technology. Luckily, the state has increased the budget for education significantly. And out of this, we are ourselves going to buy devices for our students. We are passing, at the moment, the state is laying cables across the state, and the last mile of those cables will go into schools and hospitals. So at least we are certain that in school, at least, there will be access to the internet. We'll keep on improving teaching deliberately. We've done a lot with our curriculum and schemes of work. We've integrated the what you call the core skills, the 21st century skills of teamwork and collaboration, creativity, innovation, problem solving, student personal leadership, and so on. So we've changed the look of our curriculum, and we are going to start implementing this. I'm very excited about that. We did it with a whole cohort, hundreds of people working with us, individuals, schools, universities, and so on. And I think what we've come up with is a good piece of work, and we look forward to somebody to evaluate the quality for us. We want to address the relevance of education. We saw the social cohesion after the COVID. Part of it is the lack of skills, because if you don't go to school, then you must have if you don't go to university, you must have an alternative. You must have something that gives you skills that will enable you be a productive member of society. So we are working on our vocational schools, building more vocational schools, and deliberately investing in what we are trying to call comprehensive schools. Again, we are excited about that by September, we'll have schools where, look, you have an option, go for academics or go for vocational. And if you decide to do both, it will be possible. I remember the good old comprehensive high school, Ayetoro, had such a model, and we are going to dredge up that model, and we plan to implement by September. Again, we want to, there are many broader issues that I've not addressed, like the governance of education, the federalism in our country, and so on, because I think the professor spoke well before me. I think it's quite clear that lessons have been learned, and we really have to deliberately now, as a state and as a people, invest in education as the major driver of this country's prosperity in the future. And of course, we have to broaden our network of partners. We already work with banks, with television stations, with individuals, even from across the world. Like when we were doing our history curriculum, people from across, Nigerians in the diaspora, everybody had their own ideas about how we should teach history and how we should integrate it in our curriculum. And it was a great session. And then we had great Zoom sessions where people were contributing ideas. So all in all, what I see, and I'm ending now, is that we must deliberately take these lessons. In Lagos State, we have decided to take the lessons that we've learned and continue on this, drive to improve education. That's why the budget has gone up deliberately. It was about 10, 11 to less than 12%. It's over 12% now. But don't forget that we have to rebuild Lagos. And with this budget, we will improve infrastructure, we will invest in technology, we will build more schools, and we will invest in our teachers and our students. It's a promise that we've made. And I hope in a year's time, I can come back and tell you if we did this or not. COVID or not, lockdown or not, we've just got to stay focused on what we want to do. Thank you once again, Ma, for allowing me to come to this platform. And like I said, I was not speaking for the top great private schools in Lagos. You have Dr. Omsira, who's perfectly competent to speak about their experience during this period. But I'm talking for the vulnerable children, the poorer children, disadvantaged children, girls from poor homes who faced a really daunting experience, and what we thought about and what we thought we could do for them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Olufisayo.
Thank you for the doctorate, but no, I'm Mrs. Adefisayo.
Mrs. Adefisayo, okay. Thank you very much. I will just quickly do a recap as we move on. That in Lagos State, 65 to 75% of children are in private schools, although the quality of the private schools, in about 80% of those, are probably more like public schools, and that during the COVID, a lot of lessons were learned. And one of them was that for vulnerable children, school is safer than home. And that two, they have learned that we must invest in technology, whether we like it or not. They have increased the budget. Lagos State has increased the budget for education, has laid cables to schools, has invested in devices for students, has trained their teachers, have changed their curriculum to include soft skills, and are going to adopt the model of comprehensive schools so that vocational skills, being well taught in vocational skills, will be an alternative. I want to thank you very much. And at this point, I'm going to invite the Honorable Commissioner for Education, Barrister Olasukomi Olaleye, the Honorable Commissioner for Health, for Education, Science and Technology, or your state, to please give us a view of what's happened in Oyo State and where they're going. 10 minutes, sir. I will remind you, 2 minutes to the end.
Thank you, Madam. I thank Chief Obafemi Awolowo Foundation for the opportunity to speak on the effect of COVID-19 on our basic education and the policy trust of our government. I must say that COVID-19 caught especially in the area of basic education, and the effects are still is that the session was truncated. Then again, learning through interaction with teachers also became impossible last year. And so at the end of the day, we had to cancel the third term in Oyo State. However, within the period, we were able to introduce a number of things so that we can continue to learn even during the period of the crisis. The first thing we noticed, especially in the area of basic, we were able to do a bit better as regards the secondary schools and the tertiary institutions. But for the basic education, the first thing we discovered was that we did not have content in audio or video forms to teach our students, and we had to start recording immediately, and that was almost about 2 months after we've closed schools. We started to record audio and video in area of English language, mathematics, and basic technology. Now, after we've successfully done that, then the next problem we faced was the distribution of these contents. We introduced school on the air, like Lagos State government did. Also, we as at that time, we've been able to develop our websites, which we call the Educational Management Information System. And we're able to deploy this content on the website. But also, we quickly discovered that not all the students could access the website, either because the parents don't have smartphones, or because they don't even have reception in their localities. We have 2,445 public primary schools and about 3,000 private primary schools in Oyo State. So we discovered that most of them couldn't access the content we deployed because of the lack of internet and the radio or the smartphone to reach hard-to-reach areas. Of course, we received some support from UNICEF and also from internet providers that give our students 500 MB free to use to go on our website and use some of the content we deploy there. However, it was not all problems all the same. We within the period, we developed what we call Education and Emergency Response Plan for both the primary schools and the secondary schools, even the tertiary institution as well, and that has been the basic and the basis of the plans on how to tackle these kind of problems in the future. So we started working on this, and we believe that from what we've gained and the lesson we learned, and with the resources the government in the states has deployed, I think we'll be able to reach most of the students in Oyo State. And not only that, presently, I think was it in December? Yes, in December, the government of Oyo State has released a huge sum of money for us to develop what we call education emergency management system. Now we are already developing what I call this thing. The e-learning platform to take care of both the primary and the secondary schools in Oyo State. So largely, I want to say that although we started poorly, but over time we've been able to, over a period of time, we've been able to improve in reaching out to our basic school students in the States. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. Excuse me. It's a cut off. Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Oh, I'm sorry. Everything has come. Okay, madam. So, in conclusion, with the budget provisions for in the states and the training of teachers, which is ongoing at the moment, and the support we are receiving from donor agencies, I think we've been able to face the problems and be able to do better than where we started, and also the basic education will receive the support and able to grow better than we met it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Barrister. You actually have kept to time. And from what you have said, Oyo State was doing better, found that that the secondary and tertiary levels were better, but that there were some major challenges to dealing with the primary schools in this COVID era, because you found that you had no content in audio and video form, which you have been able to move forward. You also were trying out training on radio. You had school on air, like Lagos State, and you also set up a website. The budget has been improved and training is ongoing for your teachers presently, and you're having support from for donor agencies and other friends. We wish you the very best. And at this time, I will like to call on Mrs. Ronke Shoyombo, the Special Advisor on Education, Ogun State. Good evening, Madam. 10 minutes. I will remind you 2 minutes to the end. Do you want to share a screen, or you're just going to talk? Hello? Hello.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, to Chief. Hello, Madam, can you hear me?
Yes, I can now. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. So I'm just thanking everybody tonight for for inviting me for this very important event. And quickly, with what we have done in Ogun State, without wasting much of your time, Hello?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now.
We can
Sorry,
hear you.
The network is really, really bad, so please forgive me for this tonight.
Okay.
What we're talking about is looking at all the challenges and the risk of falling further behind and becoming isolated with school doors closed. So there's no doubt about it. And with that, what Ogun State did was to actually, sorry, I'm trying to. So we had to look for strategies. And the first thing we did was to ensure continuity of the academic learning of students. And that's why we created the DigiClass, because we were the first state to start with virtual learning in Nigeria. And with that, we were able to actually capture quite a lot. But when we realized that we were not actually capturing more than 35% of our children, we had to introduce radio, we had to go on TV, on websites. And another thing that we did was to ensure distribution of food to homes where children were seriously in need. Ensuring well-being of students, training nurses and COVID-19 champions for schools, because when we were about starting, there was no way we could start without having isolation rooms. There was no way we could start without having trained nurses. And when we didn't have enough nurses, some science teachers had to step in to become COVID-19 champions, and they were really trained. Now, another thing was to ensure provision of other social services to students. Supporting the education of students with special needs, as I said, addressing emotional needs of students, and supporting students with parents that have limited command of language. I mean, with that, we've realized that children with, from illiterate homes, we needed to raise the profile of mass education, Agency for Mass Education, where we can actually teach our parents basic maths and literacy, and those are the kind of things that we have started in Ogun State. So for the policy trust perspective, you will see that we started with a low-cost innovative assessment model. And with that, we were getting about 185,000 children averagely daily. And that's to look at the people, the people going to our platforms, the people going on radio, on TV. But we needed to also be very inclusive. So we invited teachers from special needs schools so that children from special needs schools also can be catered for. Now, how did we actually do advocacy? Just like the Commissioner for Education in Lagos State talked about, we had to actually do a lot with our parents, because some parents were joining themselves together. Some parents were paying for maybe diesel on Monday. This one will pay for Tuesday. So people were working together. And we had to use the village heads and traditional leaders to be able to access some of the children in the rural areas, because we struggled a lot with that. And how do you know that every child is accessing? So what we did was to just take SS3 students. And with that, with the SS3 students, we were able to do mock WAEC. And with that, you will see the figure of the children that sat for it. From other states was 809, but from Ogun State was 16,566, which really, really impressed us that at least children are accessing us. And this was done on a Saturday. Now, another thing is, as a state, we had to actually onboard all our teachers, because this is a time where we are in the digital time that what worked before COVID-19 unfortunately cannot work after COVID-19. So all the 27,000 plus teachers were onboarded. You can see that the secondary school teachers are being grouped based on their subject of specialization for collaboration and sharing of best practices. I was so amazed because the Yoruba teachers started before everybody. They started sharing lesson plans, they started sharing resources, they started sharing good sites. And to me, that has really, really given us a very, very good comfort in Ogun State. And the primary school teachers, we did the same thing. We are yet to finish with all the students, but we only did it with the SS3 students in Ogun State. Now, for us to provide equitable and inclusive access to learning conditions, we use the COVID-19 time, the 6 months, productively, because that's when we were able to start with 952 schools that are currently being renovated in all the 236 wards of Ogun State. Now, isolation rooms were set, social distancing, so we put all these things in place to support our students. Another thing is teacher training was a vital thing for us that we have started with. We've started with our school leaders. And also we're now also accessing our teachers more as well. And you can see that when Federal gave us 52 pages of COVID-19 risk assessment form, what we did was to actually set it up on our website so that private school owners, about 17,000 private schools in Ogun State, and also the 2,000 plus public schools, they were able to access us online. And at the moment, the Computer Teachers Association of Nigeria, what we've done is to train them to see how they can start cascading that down to all teachers. Something very wonderful that we did was to actually train all the school leaders. And that's why I have to give kudos to my no, because there has to be a vision of the leader, really, and his vision in ICT. So that really helped. All hands are on deck, then they're ready to follow. Now, the way forward is supporting the free education vision from us in Ogun State is all stakeholders, government, NGOs, civil society. We should 6 months, hopefully, to provide equitable and inclusive access to digital learning resources. Now, we need the support of our internet providers and media participation in ensuring quality education. Another thing is parental engagement has got to be more thorough. Continuity of limited physical education service for the most vulnerable children, distributing information and providing online resources in different languages. More than ever for accessible and qualitative. Thank you.
I know there has been a lot of internet challenge, and I will just quickly say that, yes, Ogun State, thank you very much. Just as a quick recap, Ogun State, one of the major things, they also recognized the problems that COVID brought. They started the DG class and to support education, which was similar to the class on air. But they also supported their students with food to students. But some of the things that they learned was that it was important to involve the parents in working with government to ensure that education was sustainable and was used. They used their local. They also worked with the traditional leaders. And they found that it was important for the telcos and internet providers to work with governments so as to provide education to the most vulnerable. Teacher training was also a major focus of what they did. So I'm sorry I cannot totally recap, but those are the main points. We will now move on to the private educators coping with the pandemic. And I'll be inviting Dr. Mrs. Femi Ogunsoya, the CEO of Oxbridge Tutorial School, who was a former microbiologist, which I just found out. 10 minutes, ma.
Right. Thank you very much indeed for the introduction, Shade. Thank you, Dr. Ola Odosunu, for inviting me to be among such learned people who are such eloquent speakers. And it's been very interesting, the different submissions from America, from people in the diaspora, as well as the commissioners for education, and the special assistant to the Ogun State governor on education. It's been really, really interesting and eye-opening. I'm going to, a lot of the things I might have said might have been said already, but I'm going to focus more on the private education sector. As a preamble, before COVID-19, about 10.5 million Nigerian children aged between 5 and 14 were out of school. Only 61% of 6 to 11-year-olds regularly attended primary school. Nigeria contributes approximately 20% of the total global out-of-school population. That's before COVID-19 even hit us. So there were already challenges in our education sector, in our education space, as have been enumerated by the professors who gave the initial talks. Next slide, please. Then came the COVID-19 pandemic, which, as the professor who spoke from, I think Kenya it was, Professor Oye, I can't remember, sorry. There was the greatest disruption to education. And of course, the accompanying realities for each and every one of us, including those of us in private sector, was confusion, panic, fear, that feeling of uncertainty, that hollowness in one's tummy. How does one cope with this? It's something we've never experienced, except anybody who's about 100 years old, because the last time it happened was in 1918. So about 1.5 million children dropped out of school as a result of the pandemic and due to the COVID-19. So was Nigeria ready to address or even cope? Obviously, the question was, the response is no. We were caught napping in Nigeria. But it's been an eye-opener, as has been enumerated before me. A lot of lessons have been learned. Were private schools ready? That's $1 million question. Because yes, we've been dancing around technology, but we hadn't actually focused nor settled down to it to actually see and appreciate the importance of technology in education. Next slide, please. So in Nigeria, as the Commissioner for Education, the Commissioners of Education have said, there are different categories of private schools. We have the mission schools, that is the Anglican, Baptist, Methodist, Catholic. The new generation churches also have schools, the Muslims have schools. Then we have the international schools. We have language schools, French-speaking Italian schools. We have a lot of owner schools. And then, of course, we have the low-fee paying schools. And the Commissioner for Education, Lagos State, has spoken about low-fee paying schools, that is the low-income schools, are very similar, broadly, to the state schools. 80,000 privates, there are about 80,000 private secondary schools in Nigeria. And as Commissioner for Education in Lagos State said, about 18,575 in Lagos alone. And this constitutes about 75 to 80% of schools. 33% of the children are enrolled in private schools. So you can see that the private schools are taking care of a small proportion of the children who have age-going schools in Nigeria generally. Now, the immediate strategies that we pivoted to when the COVID-19 first started, when it was announced abroad, when it was declared a pandemic in February 2020, we were wondering if it would ever get to Nigeria. But having learned from the experience of Ebola, some private schools immediately put in place task forces to start preparing, to start strategizing, to start deliberating on what we will do if it ever hits Nigeria. And lo and behold, by March, it was in Nigeria. Sorry, late February, it was in Nigeria. And by the 23rd of March, the declaration of schools closure came about to each and every one of us as a surprise, as not actually knowing what was going on. But we knew we had to immediately pivot to technology and go online. And I must give it to the Nigerian teachers. I always doff my hat when we talk about pivoting to technology, to online classes in the private sector. The teachers put in all they had. Yes, there was a lot of training done But we now notice the level of creativity. Nigerians are clever. We are brilliant if given the opportunity. So we pivoted to technology, but it's very expensive because, of course, schools had to acquire various resources, additional desktops and laptops, tablets, mobile phones, radios, all kinds of gadgets needed to be acquired in order to be able to have meaningful teaching and learning online, because it's very different from the classroom. So, of course, timetables had to be reviewed, had to be restructured. In my school, for example, we had physical classes at 1.5 hours. We had to reduce them to 50 minutes so that to be able to keep the students engaged. But one of the greatest challenges we had was data. Data is very expensive in Nigeria, and I'm very happy the person speaking after me is from MTN. It's very, very expensive. It's very unfriendly, the level of commitment and investment that schools had to make in data. Then, of course, there are challenges of electricity, both in schools and at home for the children, and which increased the level of expenditure because we had to also depend a lot on generators and use diesel. So a lot of these needed to be acquired immediately. What we did with data, for example, with our teachers, we had to give them additional funds to be able to acquire data so that they could work from home and have access to data. And what some of them did, or what we advised them to do, was that if you have challenges with electricity, just load your phone and use the hotspot on your phone. So there were a lot of investments on delivery platforms, Zoom, EdTech, Google Classrooms, Edmodo, Kahoot, Prezi, WhatsApp, a lot of investment. Schools immediately, I would say that our experiences are quite equivalent to the private schools abroad. The private schools in Nigeria rose up to the occasion despite all the challenges and did the needful. Then